Hi, I'm Marthel Neville. Time now for Sunday House Call.
And I'm Eric Shawn, as always, welcome. Joining us, Dr. Mark Siegel, professor of medicine at NYU's Langone Medical Center and author of The Inner Pulse, Unlocking the Secret Code of Sickness and Health.
And Dr. David Samadi, chairman and professor of urology at Lenox Hill Hospital and chief of robotic surgery. Good to see both of you, Doc.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
See you next week.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we just heard Janice Dean talk about how cold it's going to be at the Vikings game, and winter, of course, brings more than just cold temperatures and the ice and snow. What you may not know is that all that cold weather can actually have an impact on you beyond just like frostbite. What you think could also lead to heart problems. So, Dr. Siegel, what's that about? I mean, you know about cold, frostbite, Raynaud's syndrome, but affecting your heart?
Hugely important topic, because heart disease is the #1 killer of men and women in the United States. And it's because the coronary arteries that feed the heart are so tiny, and we get every little bit of oxygen we can out of it. You could be sitting there with a tendency towards heart disease and not know it. Now, what happens in the winter, Eric? That's your question. At first, I thought it was just the cold weather, because a study in the 90s at a big journal called Circulation looked at this and found that we produce a hormone called norepinephrine that tightens up our arteries. You get constricted arteries. Guess what that does? It raises your blood pressure. Raise your blood pressure, increases your risk of heart attacks and heart disease and strokes. If you clamp down on your arteries and you get high blood pressure, you can get heart disease. But it isn't only cold weather. There's 2 huge studies that have come out in the last 5 years, one in Europe and Switzerland, and another one here in the United States, out in L.A. yet, and New Mexico, which showed that in Western climates, you have the same problem. And you know why? Even in warm weather in the winter, there's influenza. Influenza is the great enabler. The flu, you get the flu, you can get a heart attack from getting so sick from the flu. The stress of holiday times, eating, putting on weight, not watching your cholesterol. You're over your family's house. Somebody's yelling at you.
But, you know, we're still talking about the cold weather. Want to keep it there because I think, I'm not sure, does it affect asthmatics as well? I mean, all of this stuff is all in the lung, the heart.
That's an excellent point. And what happens, as Mark was describing, is that the whole biology can change during the winter time. So you're talking about your respiratory rate can go up. So if you don't have enough reserve in your heart or in your lungs, asthmatic bronchitis, it can really push you over the edge and you can get into trouble. My biggest problem during the winter time is the fact that we don't get enough sunshine, and people's vitamin D can actually drop. It's one of the reasons why during the winter time I take about 5,000 units of vitamin D for myself.
But Dr. Mark says take vitamin D3.
Well,
correct,
that's the active one, and calcium. But during the summertime, I take about 2,000 because I'm out there, I'm getting enough sun, so I don't need it. And low vitamin D has shown that it can lead to diabetes, obesity, and everything else. Talk about the fact that just the cold nature of itself, it can constrict those vessels, as Mark was describing. Your viscosity of the blood can go up, and it can lead to, there's something called seasonal hypertension. I don't know if you knew that or not. So during those days, you have to be careful. If you're on Coumadin, if you're on cardiac stent, if you have cardiac issues, you have no business out there to be shoveling snow and put pressure on yourself. Or if you're not active enough, you don't want, this is not the time to really push yourself. Of course, frostbite is another big problem. Frostbite can actually hurt you, so you want to stay away from any cold weather.
You talk about shoveling snow. We know about the problems with heart attacks and shoveling snow, to be careful with that. But you're saying when you're out in the cold, just being in the cold weather is enough. You should maybe slow down.
Well, one is just being in the winter, as I said, but the other is being in the cold weather because your arteries constrict and your blood pressure goes up. David just added the other main point, which is you're shoveling snow. You're not used to that. You're suddenly active, or your weather's changing all the time. You're in a warm house. You go out into cold weather. Your arteries constrict. Somebody hands you a shovel. You haven't shoveled your driveway in 10 years. You can have a heart attack doing that. You should not do sudden activity, or you might slip, or you might struggle against the snow drifts and try to get out of the house.
There are falls and fractures that can happen in the elderly that you want to be careful. There's also an art of shoveling snow that you have to learn. You don't use your back. If somebody passes out, you need to make sure that you know CPR, you call 911. One other thing that's really important, which a lot of people can relate to this, called seasonal affective syndrome. It's a depression. And what happens when you don't get enough light, your melatonin goes up, your serotonin, which is the happy hormone, goes down. And about 6% of Americans really during the winter time, they get depressed. Now, medication doesn't have to be the best treatment. Sometimes you get light therapy. You buy lights from Walgreens for a lot of stores, and you sit in front of it for about 20 minutes a day, and that can make it does work, absolutely. So you want to be careful.
I want to make one more point here, the direction David was going. I want to make a public service message. If you don't know CPR, learn a CPR course. And here's the main thing about CPR. It's not the breathing so much, it's the pumping on the chest. If you come upon someone and they don't have a pulse, this is how you hold your hands, like this, and you pump on the center of the chest. If you can do 15 of these in a minute, you can save a life. But don't just do it. Get trained to do it.
I think it's actually interesting that if you feel that there's no pulse, and the best place to feel the pulse is either on the neck or you can actually feel it on the wrist. If you check and there's absolutely no pulse, the first thing you do, and I'm not going to hurt you, you basically hit someone in the chest really hard. And that by itself has shown that it can like re-jump and reboot the heart, and you can save someone's life.
And then CPR. And call 911, of course.
Until they show up, yes.
All right.
Thank you, docs.
Yeah, now that you scare me, but that's good advice.